Hi, and welcome back to another episode on this, talking about coaching and mentoring on this series. And I've amazing coaches and amazing business people that are delving into their knowledge share and talking about their experiences in the coaching world and predominantly around leadership coaching, and which this series is all about. Now, a fantastic guest with me today. His name is Mark Duffy. He's the founder of Clever Coaching, and he is a wellbeing psychologist, and he also lectures in ICF accredited courses. Mark is fantastic. He's very active on LinkedIn. If you've seen any of his posts, they're absolutely amazing, so definitely check them out. And before we came on, he was talking a little bit about a journey he's embarked on, and if any of you are on LinkedIn, you would have gotten snippets of that journey. But I'm going to let Mark introduce a little bit about what he does and his business. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Louise. It's good to be here. And I'm a corporate wellbeing psychologist, as you mentioned. And what I do is I go into organizations and I help them with their wellbeing. And I have developed a model based on 15 years of psychology and neuroscience and positive psychology, workplace psychology and coaching, because I've seen a few factors or issues that many organizations and people need to overcome. And one of them is that people don't know where to start. And secondly, is that there is a huge emphasis on helping people overcome negative states and get from, let's say, a state of stress or burnout or depression to their normal states of well-being, which is really, really important, especially when people are in a really difficult state. But with that, we get people to their normal state or their baseline level at best, but we forget about helping people to raise their baseline level of happiness. So helping them to be more happy, more engaged, more fulfilled, and to operate at their optimum. And by raising people's baseline level of happiness, or well-being rather, we reduce those negative states too. So we know through research that if we can help people to be happier, they'll be less depressed. And we know from our own experience, I don't think there's anyone here that has been happy and depressed at the exact same time. It just makes sense. And also, organizations that are happier have 125% less burnout. So that's striking. So if we can help people to raise their baseline level, we're also reducing the negative. So we don't want to forget about those tools and techniques from positive psychology that focus on enhancing the baseline. Another thing that is really important is that a lot of the tools and models out there are outdated. So one of the most famous models there is the PERMA model. And one of those pillars is achievement. But we know through research that if we focus all our emphasis on achievement, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're postponing our happiness and fulfillment to some time in the future. Also, when we achieve, we release a spike of dopamine, and that plummets afterwards, so we can feel even more dejected than before we achieved. Now, we don't want to forget about achievement. Of course, it's so important. And we don't want to forget about goals. And we need them as a form of motivation and a form of direction. But that shouldn't be where most of our emphasis is on, because the goal isn't necessarily what separates people. If you think about it, let's say the Premiership, all teams in the Premiership, they all want to win. They all have that goal of winning. So it's not the goal that sets them apart. It's the strategies and the habits to achieve that goal that sets them apart. So what I've done is I've looked at the models out there, I've thrown out the weaknesses, and I've pooled all the strengths together. And so I've developed the cleverest model of well-being based on the research to help people to know where to start and include the most up-to-date research. And the first pillar, the C, stands for connection. And we know through research that this is the #1 predictor of happiness, depth of relationships. And also in organizations, connection is the top driver of engagement. So it's really important that we can help people with this to be more connected in organizations. Also, life or work purpose, and if we can marry the two, it's transformational. This functions as a North Star for people, so they have focus and collective purpose in an organization. And this seriously enhances retention and recruitment. And 66% of students prioritize purpose when looking for a role. Also, millennials are 5 times more likely to stay in an organization if they connect to that organization's purpose. And then we have engagement. Only 15% of the global workforce are highly engaged, and that's shocking. And it doesn't have to be the case. Some of the techniques are so simple that we can use to help people to be more engaged in the organizations. And again, there's another myriad of powerful benefits here. More highly engaged workforces have 65% less staff turnover, and performance shoots up as well. Then we have vitality. So this is physical well-being, which is often forgotten about in models. And when we help people with their physical well-being, their quality of life shoots up, they have added energy, and for the organization, they add $2,500 worth of additional productivity a year to the organization. And then we have emotional and social intelligence. And we know that the pillars of emotional and social intelligence are so important for leaders. Self-awareness, a pillar, is the #1 predictor of leadership success, according to studies. And Forbes say that empathy, which is another pillar of emotional intelligence, is the #1 predictor of leadership success because of its myriad of powerful benefits. It's so important. And I mentioned self-awareness. Would you believe that 95% of leaders believe that they're self-aware, but just 10 to 15% of them are. So that's a striking difference. If people believed that they weren't self-aware, at least it wouldn't be as damaging because people would do something about it. But when people believe they're self-aware, they don't really do as much work on it. And then we have resilience. Again, another myriad of powerful benefits when we focus on resilience. And I love talking about, a lot of people know what PTSD means, post-traumatic stress disorder, but not everyone knows what PTSG means. And that's post-traumatic stress growth. We can actually grow from trauma. We can end up in a better situation because we have that added appreciation for life, added competence, added confidence. And the only difference is our shift in perspective. And if we know that we can get that from even trauma, imagine what we can do with our everyday annoyances and stressors. A simple shift in perspective can transform them and help us to grow. And then we have emotional and psychological well-being. And this is where I speak about the more traditional forms of psychology, when we help people to get from their really difficult stage to their baseline level. So we're using things like CBT or cognitive behavioral coaching. 90% of people over the course of a year will experience symptoms of depression, 90%. And at any given time, they reckon about 25% of people. If you're looking at your team of 10 people, at any given time, maybe 2 to 3 people are experiencing symptoms of depression. And over the course of the year, at least 9 of them will. So that's striking as well. We need to be able to have the tools to be able to help them with this. And as I talk through each of these as well, I provide them with the tools, scientifically proven tools, to help people with each of these pillars. And then we have satisfaction. So this is another word really for happiness at work, really. And only about half of people are happy at work. And the benefits of this are mind-blowing, really. 43% is the increase in productivity when people are happy. And when organizations are happier, we have 125% less burnout. We have 300% increase in innovation. Safety incidents go down. Depression decreases. And again, the tools are so simple. The techniques are so simple. And then we have transformational growth. This has levels to it. And at its lowest level, we want to help people to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset and understand that everything can help us grow, even difficult situations. We can learn from it and grow from it. And we use feedback as fuel. We see it as a gift. And then at the highest level, then we have enlightenment. Because we know through research now that enlightened people practiced practices that are now scientifically proven to enhance our clarity and internal peace and our competence and intuition. So that's the cleverest model or framework of well-being. And what I do is I introduce it. I help people to understand their well-being score for each of them, so they understand where they're strongest at and why they're strongest at it, and then where they might want to focus. And then I introduce tools and techniques that are scientifically proven to enhance those areas. And then I coach the leaders as well to continue the success with each of these pillars.
Looking at it from a leadership perspective, Mark, we talk about, I suppose, satisfaction and, I suppose, do you have examples that you can give? Because I can see the acronym and I can see all the different variables of it. But if you're a leader in the workplace or a leadership team, what does that look like from a satisfaction piece, and who's kind of, we're all accountable for ourselves in a certain aspect when we show up into the workplace, that, we're open to that feedback and all of that. But, how do maybe leaders that don't have a lot of that knowledge try and, I suppose, understand their role in that satisfaction piece with the team they're managing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we know through research that one of the most powerful interventions in positive psychology, really, to be happier, is to simply write down 5 things about our week that we're grateful for and why we're grateful for it. And we can apply this in the workplace, because if we ask people, what is working? What are your successes? What are the wins? Report them back to me. We'll have a discussion about it. We'll all learn from it. That's a really positive conversation, and people are rewiring their brains to acknowledge what the positive, rather than continuously focusing on the negative. And we know through research that we have a negatively bias. We're hardwired to focus on the negative. And when we rewire our brain to focus on the positive, we get more of that as well. So it's not about denying the negative. It's about focusing on what we can do in the future and how do we learn from this positive information. But also we can focus on negative information in a positive way. So we use it as a form of growth. We're, as opposed to blaming, shaming, or denying, we're using this information and we're all having a positive conversation about solutions and learning from it and growing from it. And that is essentially a really important element of psychological safety. And psychological safety is the #1 predictor of success of a team. That's how important it is. And psychological safety is simply the feeling that I can speak up with my mind and not feel that I will be chastised or humiliated, and just feel comfortable to have an open, sometimes uncomfortable conversation. And when we have a growth mindset and we realize that we can grow from everything and use it, then we're able to have those conversations because nothing is a threat anymore. And that involves vulnerability. A leader must be willing to be vulnerable and be the role model for this new way of thinking and operating, because it's not our natural way of operating. We want to be seen in a positive light. We don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations a lot of the time. And when a leader is able to be vulnerable and able to demonstrate that they are open to uncomfortable conversations and they invite them and they never shoot the messenger and they thank them for the line of sight, that leads to happiness in the workplace. And also, a leader must be open to giving praise and acknowledgement. We know through research as well that it's called the Losada ratio. There's a ratio of positive to negative comments that we need in order for people to perform at their optimum. We need, as leaders, to introduce 3 positive comments for every 1 negative one if we want to have a healthy team. And if we introduce 6 positive comments for every 1 negative one, we have a team that performs at their optimum, as in the highest performing teams are given positive feedback for every 1 negative one. And then the positive effect starts to wear off around 13-1. So you can't get it wrong. If you're able to have uncomfortable conversations, and you introduce positive acknowledgement, then you can't get it wrong. So I think they're really, really important bits of research really that leaders can use to help their teams to be happier, and ask your teams as well. Just have open dialogue, see them as human and see yourself as human.
Mm.
And you don't have all the answers, no one can. So ask them and they'll tell you. And again, don't shoot the messenger. We'll use it and work together on this.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And listening to what you said there, that sometimes people avoid those negative situations or feedback, and they feel uncomfortable, and they want everything to be fluffy all the time, and the uncomfortable. But I think it's quite interesting that in order to grow, that we need to have those, we need to have that balance. It can't be always one way and not the other way. So I think that's really important. And touching on what you said there, and you were going around and you were talking about the different traits or the different things that people needed to have, and empathy was one that you touched on. And I think sometimes I see a lot on social media, and I see this a lot being published, that a lot of leaders don't have empathy, or they don't have enough for teams. And I actually have seen the opposite in the retail space, where I've seen managers overuse empathy, and whereas it's in overdrive a little bit, and that impedes on their well-being as well. So I suppose, what's your take on that, Mark? Because I've seen that, where it's not, there's not maybe boundaries, or it's not healthy for that individual.
Yeah, excellent question. That's so common.
Mm.
And yeah, I've seen it as well myself. And what I think we need to understand a bit more about what empathy is. There's a misunderstanding of it. I think empathy is just an understanding of where someone else is coming from, an understanding of their emotions and their thought processes and where their behaviors are coming from. That doesn't mean that you get in the trenches with them. That doesn't mean that you own their problems. So when we can have empathy and understand where they're coming from without owning their problems, then we're protecting our energy, our emotions, and our thoughts, but also we're actually far more effective at helping them, because our energy isn't being pulled in. Our emotions aren't being pulled in to their issues. We can help them from a place of clarity, and we can still understand where they're coming from that space of clarity. I first encountered that when I was in my early 20s, and I was hosting, I volunteered for a care group of people with addiction in their families, and I heard some very difficult stories there, and I was quite fresh into it. And luckily I was with the top psychologist there, but there were times that I'd hear a story and I would get quiet, and I'd have so much empathy for that person, and even going beyond empathy, rather having sympathy, where I actually owned their problems. And I realized after a while that I was going home with this and thinking about it, and at the time I wasn't as effective, but I realized that I wasn't helping them with that. So I understood eventually, and it's a process, and it takes awareness, and what it takes is space. Give yourself space as well, and time. And it's not like a light switch, but it's one of the most important skills we can develop, is to understand where someone is coming from and let go of the need or the process of owning their problems. And when we do that more and more over time, we get better and better at it. And I just give an example as well. I was coaching a leader, and I asked them, to what extent are you owning their problems? Because she was having this issue of, you mentioned about not having boundaries and her energy being drained, and she's just such a real caring person. And like you mentioned the word overdrive, it was just going into overdrive.
Yeah.
And I asked her, to what extent are you owning their problems? And she paused for such a long length of time. And that's a powerful question for them when they do that. And then I asked her, to what extent is this helpful? And she mentioned about a few different ways why it might be helpful, but I challenged her to consider that she can understand where they're coming from without owning their problems. And she did that. So they're really important steps that we can use to conserve our energy and come at it from a space of more clarity and more understanding as well, because when we are sucked in to their world, we have less of an understanding because we don't have that clarity. we're not able to take that step back and come at it from a more, I suppose, wise, more wise setting.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you touched on earlier when you talked about that self-awareness and that awareness of others, but that awareness of self. And I think it fits quite nicely into what you've described there, I think, and asking those very probing questions and using that real, Catholic style approach with coaching, that person has come to that realization within themselves to have that, that increased awareness going forward into the other meetings, which I think is great. And it leads me really nicely into the next question I have, Mark, which is around feeling overwhelmed in the workplace with possibly you have a heavy workload and feeling that you're not getting supported from maybe the team around you. And I know you touched on the PERMA model and we spoke about your model. But maybe if you can share, if you have any stories from doing that yourself in a workshop or whatever with people, what kind of, if I was listening to this today and I'm a manager and I'm going, oh my God, Mark, give me something quick. I need a bit of help. I'm going into work. It's whatever day of the week it is today, and I'm going in for the rest of the week. And what could you maybe give someone to use as a tool for themselves to maybe help them work through that? Maybe they're going through that process at the moment.
A difficult time of stress, yes.
Yeah, overwhelm, I suppose, with maybe they're getting a lot of what's happening at the moment is a lot of people are moving jobs. There's this quiet quitting, a lot of people are leaving, and there's a lot of overwhelm that people have to take on other people's workload as well as their own, and kind of feeling that overwhelm and stressed out really in the workplace with everything that has to get done. What could they maybe do for themselves to help them get through that?
Yes, it's a great question. So what I would recommend is to work through the cleverest model and score yourself out of 10 for each of them. Identify the highest scores and your strengths in relation to that and how you can use those in this situation. And also where those scores might be low in relation to a pillar that is really important for you. And then using a scientifically proven step to enhance that pillar, so you're having a more whole wheel, more whole cleverest wheel, because they are the scientifically proven most powerful pillars of well-being. But I would also recommend, and I talk about it on the transformational growth pillar, is that we realize that we are not our thoughts and we are not our emotions. And when we can realize that we are our awareness and we can observe our thoughts and emotions, then we can view them from a place of clarity. And the more and more we do that, we realize that how bonkers sometimes these thoughts are and how unhelpful and how unkind they are. We can treat ourselves in some awful ways and they can be neurotic, completely neurotic. Yet we listen to them over and over again. And even when we find out they're wrong, we still don't challenge them or question them. And the most transformational thing we can possibly do is realize that we are not our thoughts and they are not real and they're not necessarily true. And as opposed to being caught up in them and sucked into them, like a movie, if we're watching a horror film, the only reason we're getting frightened is because we forget we're watching the film. It's like that. When we come from our place of consciousness and we realize that these are not necessarily real or true, we're not caught up in them. It's the difference between being caught up in the rapids of a river and viewing them from the riverbank. I know where I'd want to be. I'd want to be viewing them from the riverbank. And from that place of clarity, we can let them flow by. And that's okay. And then we see as time goes by, they slow down and they're no longer affecting us. And then we can choose, we can use thoughts as our servant rather than having them as our master. And from that place of clarity, we have wisdom. And from that place of clarity, we're more effective. And we're treating ourselves in a more kind manner. And we know then what needs to be done, and what needs to be done rather. And oftentimes we realize that it's the thoughts that are the issue, not necessarily the problem or the external event, because the external events are coming in through our senses anyway. And it's internally is where we process them. We give them meaning. And it's the story we tell ourselves about that event that charges us. It's not necessarily the event. There are some people out there that would roll up their sleeves and think, yes, this is a challenge, let's get this. And there are some people out there that get intimidated by it. So it's not the event that matters, it's our thought process about the event that matters. And when we can realize that our thoughts aren't real, they're arbitrary, at best even illusory, and we just let them go, and then from that place we can introduce our own thoughts about it, and from that place of clarity be far more effective at our work and not be pulled and dragged around by our thoughts and our emotions, and understand that our emotions aren't necessarily a good predictor of how formative an event will be in the future. That the most difficult events are often our most formative and important. We know that through experience. We might have had a relationship breakup, and a few years down the line, we have a better relationship, and we've realized that that wasn't for us anyway. And we've added resilience and added learning. So if we use every difficult event as even sometimes a gift, we can see it as, and that might be a stretch for people, but at least, and seeing that everything is fine, everything is okay in this moment, that if I really analyze what the issues are and catastrophizing about what might be in the future, but everything right now is fine. But we need to give ourselves space to do that. And we need to give ourselves breaks as well. We're human, we're not machines. And if we need to be able to just prioritize our list of tasks and be able to maybe delegate some of them and help people to be more competent as a result, not taking on everything, having real belief in our teams, and understanding, again, that we're human and we need to take breaks, and that from that place of clarity, then we can be less affected by the external event and take it on. See it as a challenge. We also know through research as well that that stress isn't necessarily what shortens our life expectancy. It's the belief that stress is bad for us. And because when we believe stress is bad for us, when we're stressed, our blood vessels constrict and we release cortisol. And that's what shortens our life expectancy, because that is damaging for our bodies. But if we simply believe that stress isn't bad for us, our blood vessels remain relaxed, we don't have that cortisol response, plus we release oxytocin when we're in a stress state. And that is so important for our bodies. It's really, really helpful. It's good for every system in our bodies. And how we introduce that information as a leader is that we understand, we can see things as a challenge rather than a threat. And we can see our heart racing and all those physiological responses as excitement rather than fear. And that's essentially engagement rather than disengagement, or engagement rather than fear. And the difference is transformational. You're far more effective, you're far more confident, and you're far more competent as a result.
I love that. And I think something you said there, it was really interesting, Mark. You touched on that we derive meaning making from what's going on, the words that come out or the things that happen. There's a meaning attached to it. So what might happen for you might have a different meaning, and the same situation might happen for me. And we both might, like what you said there, we both might react differently on that based on our prior life experiences or things that happen to us, that it derives a different response emotionally to that particular situation. And I suppose I've seen, journaling is quite good. I think you talked about gratitude there. What else do you think that someone might do to get that perspective when they are in the trenches of it, Mark, where they're kind of feeling they can't see the wood from the trees sort of thing? I think writing down gives you that little bit of slowing down piece. But what else would you say? I know you've a lot of kind of experience around that space.
Yeah, great question again. So one of them is just simply understanding again that it's not the situation, it's our thoughts about it and letting go of it over and over again. It's the practice of letting go. And this can really only be understood as an experience rather than intellectually, because when we do that, just continuously let go and just relax and breathe and let go. It no longer has that grip over us, but we need to do it from a place of awareness, really, because we can get so easily pulled in and and a few minutes down the line, we've got an abundance of thoughts that are just unhelpful and they just add to each other and just give each other energy. And we can feel that internally too. So the quicker we have awareness, the better. And the quicker we let go, the better. And I'm not saying to let go of this, of actually in a passive way. I mean, letting go of your internal resistance to it. And from that place, then you can still do something about the situation. It doesn't mean you don't do anything about it. So letting go is huge. And then having a shift in perspective about it. I think letting go is powerful because you're not engaging in it. And then after a while, then those thoughts start to slow down. But then if you introduce your own thoughts, a more positive perspective on it, asking what is good about this, or how can I turn this into a positive? They are powerful questions, and you will find answers to them that might be difficult to come up with at the start. But if you ask them, you might even need to ask them over and over again, but you will find answers to them, and it'll transform everything for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think what you said there actually would be a great little exercise for someone to do. What could be the positive in this situation? How can we flip this, or how can we change this? And challenging ourselves to maybe look at it from a different perspective, from maybe the way that we're dealing with it, and taking that bit of abstract view on that particular thing, and taking that little bit of emotion away from it and detaching, to see that a little bit more clearly, because we, as you said, we attach a lot of emotion to things, and that's kind of feeding into that energy you spoke about with thoughts. Yeah,
powerful, absolutely powerful. And in addition to what I mentioned there, actually all of this needs awareness, and a powerful way we can build our awareness is meditation. If we start out our day with meditation and end our day with a bit of meditation, they say only 15 minutes a day is needed. And you find more and more we become more and more aware in our normal day, and we try to introduce it into our normal day. And from that sense of awareness, then we can understand, we can just trust in our own internal wisdom what is needed in this situation. We'll know ourselves if we check in with ourselves. And a lot of people, they don't meditate, or they don't enjoy meditation, or they don't believe in it because they feel like, first of all, they don't know if they're doing it wrong, and you're never doing it wrong. It's never a bad meditation, even if your mind is drifting away all the time, because there are different forms of meditation. Even one form is simply letting your mind drift and then realizing where it went and bringing yourself back and analyzing that, so you can't get it wrong. And secondly, if you see your mind is drifting or hectic, which can be the case quite often when we're in that difficult state, that is helpful for us, because that's what's going on in the background. It's not that because you became aware of it, it got more active. That's going on in the background without our awareness of it. And that is essentially what is governing our lives and running our behavior and governing how we feel. So then we do things like try to numb our emotions, like drinking that wine or to excess, or doing things that aren't helpful, rather than actually letting go of it, or understanding it and being non-judgmental, or realizing that our thoughts aren't true and that our thoughts in this instance aren't helpful. So yeah, meditation is hugely important, and coming from that space of just non-judgment and just being kind to yourself is so important and key.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Mark. And I think the meditation you said there, I think it's not there is different variations of it. I think that's important for people to know, that it could be a yoga class, it could be sitting down in a park, watching the birds flutter. It is just having that quiet moment to yourself, connecting with the breath, I think. And
Mm.
some really simple things like that, like you said, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to fit a certain box in order to think that we're doing it. We can do it in our own ways, which is amazing.
Yeah.
I love listening to your well-being. You're an absolute wealth of knowledge, Mark. And I think today, just to give everyone an insight, I had an idea of what way I wanted to go, but talking to Mark before we went live, and listening to him and his own journey and his own business and transformation and everything, I couldn't not exploit all of his knowledge on this session and delve into more on it, because I think it's so needed now, Mark, in such, this VUCA world we live in, where change is constantly happening, and some of us are maybe adjusting better than others in that space. But for anyone that's listening today and that's like, I really want to reach out to Mark or want to get to know you, where do they reach out, or how can they find you?
Yes, you could find me on LinkedIn, Mark Duffy, and my business is Clever Coaching. And if you'd like to email me, you can email me at mark@clevercoaching.ie, and I'd be delighted to have a chat with you.
Yeah, very good. We'll have the links underneath for anyone that wants to connect with Mark, and I definitely would connect with him. He's a wealth of knowledge for organizations, and so much there around the well-being. Honestly, we could talk and talk about this. You would have gotten a lot of knowledge here today. So thank you so much, Mark, for coming on. I appreciate your time and taking the time out to chat with me today.
Thank you, Louise. I enjoyed that. It was a pleasure.